G'day and welcome to another gun related video on my channel. If you've watched my channel for a while, you'll see that I've posted a few videos in the past about the use of one of these hydraulic Berdan decapping tools for decapping Berdan primed cases. There's been a fair bit of interest in it. Obviously there's a lot of shooters out there who would like to be able to reload Berdan cases, and decapping them is the main issue involved in that. Well, there's two issues involved in that. Number one is decapping them, and number two is actually getting Berdan primers to fit them. Assuming you can get the primers, well then, if you've got a source of original military cases that are Berdan primed, it makes good sense to actually use them. They're generally very good quality brass. As I said, those videos have been quite popular, and I actually quite regularly have actually received messages from people wanting to know questions like, can you give me the dimensions of your tool, or where did you get that tool, or where can I buy one, this sort of thing. And I've endeavoured to answer them. I've actually even sent my other main tool. This is the rim cartridge one, this one. But my other tool that I use in the 6.5 videos, I measured up and printed and did a drawing of them and sent it off to a variety of people so that they could make their own. So I thought, well, it would make sense for me to actually just put one video out which gives all the information for anyone who wants to know. So if you're watching this and you've got to this point and you have absolutely no interest in ever reloading Berdan prime cases, well, there's probably not a lot of point you're watching anymore, because it's not going to be of any interest to you at all. However, if you do think that you would like to get yourself a Berdan decapping tool and want to know how to go about doing it, well then keep watching, because I'll impart as much information as I can in this video that will allow you to be able to do that. Now, before we start looking at some diagrams, I want to say that I have no education or experience in any form of technical drawing, so the drawings are just me measuring the tools and putting them on a piece of paper. So please don't criticise my drafting efforts, but I should give the information that you need. So what I'm going to do is I've actually got printed diagrams of both with figures of both of my tools, both the rimless and the rimmed cartridge tool. And most of the dimensions are actually not even relevant. You know, the external dimensions are, it's really the internal dimensions that are the important part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my iPhone just on a little tripod, and we'll have a look at these sheets, and then we'll talk about all the different dimensions, how important they are, what the tolerances should be, that sort of thing. And then what I'll do is I'll actually then just put both of the diagrams at the end of this video, so that you can actually then, if you want to go further, you can actually just take a screenshot and print it, and you'll have a copy of the diagrams and the dimensions. So I'm going to talk about what to do, and the other thing I'm going to talk about is how to go about getting one of these made, if you want one. Alright, so this is a drawing I made of my original tool when someone asked me many years ago, and I measured it up and just drew a picture of it, and I've sent this to a variety of people. Now, as I said, let's just talk about all the different dimensions of this and talk about what's important. Now, probably the most important dimension is the relationship between the internal diameter of here and the external diameter of here. And this tool works quite well, and it works out that the I don't know why I've gone to 2 decimal places, that was a bit overboard when I did that, but basically the internal diameter of this is about 12.5 millimeters, and the external diameter of this is about 12.4 millimeters. So we've got about a 0.1 millimeter difference, which allows a slide fit in there. In my other tool, this one was actually made
by someone else and just well, you know, I kind of gave him some money for it, but given to me basically to do 6.5 Swedish. But it's a close enough case that it does a lot of other rimless cases as well. When I had my other one made, it was actually made by the son of a friend of mine who was a sort of tool maker, and I actually gave him this one and asked him, and then just told him the dimensions of the bigger one and said, can you make the same thing but with bigger dimensions, which he did. But there was a couple of mistakes he made. The main one was that he allowed too big a difference between this internal diameter and this external diameter. I think he allowed about 0.3 millimeters. And so it meant that it didn't work, because if you put your case in and filled it up with water, when you put this one on, there was too much area for the water to just come squirting out, so it would just sink straight down before you had time to hit it. So you need to have fairly close tolerances between this and this, but not so close that it won't slide easily in there. And you see, if you're watching any of my other videos, actually I can show it to you. So here's that tool I was talking about. So if you just disregard that O-ring for a minute, if you look at this, there's quite a bit of slot between there and there. So this actually needs to be bigger. I could actually make another one of these now, because I didn't have a lathe when all this happened, but I've now got a little lathe, so I could actually make a better one of them. But all I did in the end was, I actually got another guy I know who's got a lathe just to machine that little slot in there, and I just put an O-ring on there, and it actually works quite well now, although it's actually a bit too tight. And that's another thing I discovered. If you make it too tight, if your primer doesn't give, instead of the water squirting out and allowing this to stay in place and give you a chance to have a second go, what it tends to do is it's like hitting a solid brick, and the concussion makes this bounce out, and then you have to pick it up. So that's one mistake you can make. The other mistake that was made with this was when I got it, it had a great big head that was as big as this and about twice as high. So the whole thing was just a bit too heavy, so when you put it on, it just sunk down really quickly because of its weight. Even this head's too big. I could probably machine half of that thickness off. So your head has to just be big enough to take your hammer blows, but you don't want this to be too heavy. So it's another thing. Now, if we look at the external dimensions of this, we've got the thin part and the thick part. Now, the thick part's not completely necessary, but what it does is it actually just gives, it gives a nice, big, stable base. And then because it's heavier on the bottom, it doesn't knock over. So you can actually do it, pull it out, you know, put it down, throw your case away, and this is not going to be tend to fall over all the time. You could just make it out of a single bar. Now, this is a bit, what's this, 20, this one, or the other one actually, the other one's about 25, so it's about an inch. So it's probably like nominally an inch. I don't have the other one here actually, so I can't show you that, but it's basically the same pretty much dimensions. If you want to just save money and you don't want to get a great big piece of bar and, you know, 1.5 inch and machine all this metal off, if you want to make it as cheap as possible, you could actually just use straight 1 inch bar and just don't bother having this lump at the end. It just means it will be not as stable, but it will still work fine. So, and I'll talk about where to get the steel from a bit later on when we're talking about how to order one of these tools. So, alright, so we've talked about the top, we've talked about the internal diameter. The next thing to talk about is, see this part here. Now this is where the case sits. We can draw a case in here. So the case sits like this. We'll give it a little rimless design. There we go, a bit of a bottleneck. Oh, it's gone quite small ball, but anyway. Oh, we don't have a projectile there. What am I drawing a projectile for? Alright, so the case sits like that. Let's make it a bit more realistic and have like... Alright, so the case sits like that, and the primer's sitting in its pocket. So we've got the primer pocket, a little thing, and then that's the inside, so you've got your touch hole here. Alright, so see how this edge here is actually a right angle, so you've got a flat area for the case to sit on. I think that it's probably not imperative, but I think it probably would make it more likely to be more effective and work better. So my original tool is made like that. I think the guy actually drilled the hole and then cut it with a boring bar, which actually created a 90-degree angle. My other one I think was just drilled, because it's actually got, when you feel down inside it with something, it's actually shaped more like this. From a drill bit, you know, probably more like that. From the base of a drill bit. It does still work, but if you think about it, the case is going to be sitting just on one point on one. I mean, it's going to be sealed all the way around, but only on a very small area. So you're more likely to get leakage when you're hitting it. So if you can get your machinist, if you're getting it made, or make yourself get that angle flat, I think it's important. Now the other thing is the actual length either of the tool in relation to the length of the punch. Now obviously, if this punch sits in here, it's a bit too small for that, isn't it? But as you can imagine, the punch can only really go down to kind of above the case, because it's going to hit the case if it goes all the way down. So what you need to do is work out the distance from here to here, work out the distance from here, work out the distance from here to here, and then when you subtract that distance from that distance, it should be greater than the length of the case, or the length of any case you're likely to use. It doesn't really matter how long the tool, you can make it extra long because it pressurizes the whole inside. So you may as well make it big enough to accommodate any case. So, you know, this tool will do any case from there, you know, or it'll do a case that's, you know, like this big, as long as the plug is not going to hit the case. So that's another dimension that's kind of important. And the last dimension that's important is the diameter of the actual hole where the primer comes out. So your case, as we've shown, is sitting there. So as you pressurize it, you've got a differential pressure between the inside of the case and below the primer pocket, which actually pops the primer out. But there has to be room. It has to be enough of a shoulder here to seal the case, but the hole has to be big enough for the primer to pop out. Of course, you've got a little bit of clearance on the sides of the case, depending on what size case you're doing. So if the case is not sitting centrally, you know, the primer still has to be able to come down this hole. So this one actually works really quite well for 6.5 and 7.62, etc. The diameter of this hole is 7.2 millimeters, and my primers on my 6.5 are 5.5 millimeters. So we've got a 1.7 millimeter clearance between the primer diameter and this hole here. Now in 303s, for example, they have, most 303, British 303 ammo or Commonwealth ammo has quarter inch, 0.25 inch primers. They're quite big. That's about, 0.25 is about 6 point something millimeters. So they're quite large compared to a lot of other Berdan primers. I'm not sure that you can even buy those primers anymore, but yeah, so if you were doing 303s and you could actually buy 303 primers and the primers themselves are 6 millimeters, you probably need this hole about 8 millimeters, I think, across. And so this one here was actually a bit too small when I was trying to do 303 primers. I think they were getting stuck, and I actually drilled it out a little bit to make it work better. So that's the other dimension. The external dimensions here, the external dimensions here, the size of this, the size of the head on this, you know, apart from the aforementioned mention of the actual weight of it, they're all fairly irrelevant. But if you use the dimensions that I give at the end of this video, you can actually take a screenshot. If you use those dimensions and you get them made to that size, well, it will be quite effective for most cases. So this is the drawing I just quickly knocked up the other night for, it's actually this particular tool here, this rimmed case tool. As I said, I got this made by someone using the other tool as a template, but as I said, this one had a few errors in it, so I've actually modified to what I think it should be, and on this drawing. So if you make one to the dimensions shown on this drawing, it should be fine for doing 303s, 7.62 by 54 rimmed, and maybe, you know, some other weird rimmed cases. A lot of those old military rimmed cases, as long as the rim's small enough to go down the hole. Some of them, you know, the older cases have giant rims. I'm not sure if it would do a label case or whatever, but again, you can just modify these dimensions. But as you can see, I've actually made this 13.5, which is what it is, and then I've made this 13.4, whereas it's actually only about 13.2, I think. But yeah, if you made 13.5 and 13.4, that should be a nice slide fit in there. I've made the head only 10, I've reduced the size of the head, as I said, to make it lighter, only 10 mils. And yeah, and where this actual step is here, it can be anywhere, you know. You could drill it all the way down to the bottom here if you wanted to. That sort of makes no difference because it's just the differential between the two sides of the case, really.
So if you want one of these Berdan decapping tools for a specific purpose, you can't just go out and buy one. You're either going to have to make it yourself or get someone to make it for you. Now, assuming most people don't have the means to actually make it themselves, they're going to have to go to a machinist. Now, any competent machine shop should be able to just knock one of these up reasonably quickly. It's probably worth you actually getting hold of the raw material first, so you're not walking into a shop and they're having to find a piece of stainless steel. You know, they don't want to do it, spending more time than they have to. Now, as I said, this one's obviously made, so this is 38 millimeters. Actually, they're both 38 millimeters, so they're both probably made out of 1.5 inch stainless steel bar, which is about 38 millimeters. So I just went and had a look on eBay, and in Australia here you can buy online, you can buy a piece of 38 millimeter by 150 millimeter, which is 6 inches, which is a bit longer than these. These are about 120 millimeters each. So you've got a bit, well, you're going to need some to make the plug as well. So you're going to need, actually, I forgot about that. So yeah, you're probably going to have to buy 200 millimeters of bar. I forgot about the little plug when I had a look on the net. But I went back to eBay, and here's a screenshot of looking at 200 millimeters of 38 mil bar. Comes to about $65 with free postage. It'll probably be cheaper in the US, I'd say. Most of that sort of stuff is, so you'll probably be able to buy it in the US for $30 or $40, I'd imagine, for a length of 150. If you really want to save money, as I said, you can just buy 1 inch steel, because it'll mean the materials will be a bit cheaper because it's smaller, and also you won't be paying the machinist to cut all this material off to take it down to, you know, your 25 odd millimeter diameter, outside diameter. Yeah, so if you get yourself your raw materials, and then just decide if you want to decap 6.5 Swedish 8mm Mauser, 6.5 7.7 Carcano, 6.5 7.7 Japanese, 3006. Yeah, they're all the main rimless rounds I can think of. 7.7 Swiss, 7.5 Swiss, 7.5 French. All of those should, the diameters, I'm pretty sure, I haven't actually checked some of the main ones, but of course all the, most of the common ones are actually based on 8mm Mauser, sort of pretty much base diameter. So all of those, you could actually just take this plan for the rimless cases to a machinist and say, and your piece of stainless steel, say, there you go, there's that and that, can you please make me that? And maybe point out if you think, well, actually, if they're a good machinist, they'll actually follow the plans anyway, and they should actually do this, this 90-degree corners at the bottom and stuff. And I don't know how much it's going to cost to do, but I'd imagine, you might be looking at, $150 or something for them to turn up something like that. So it's probably going to cost you $200 for the tool. But then if you're like me, I've actually reloaded my Berdan 6.5 cases probably 100 times. So I haven't spent anything on cases for the whole 25 or 30 years I've been shooting my rifle. So it's, I didn't pay much for it, but even if I had to pay $200 for it way back then, I would have saved that many times over. If you want to do one of the larger rimmed cases, like 303 British, if you can get primers for it, or 7.62 by 54 rimmed, or one of the other European rimless cartridges, just make sure that the diameter of the rim is no more than the internal diameter of this tool. But you could, same thing, you could just buy the 38 by 200 millimeter stainless steel rod on eBay or your local steel supplies or whatever, and then just take it to a machinist with this plan and get them to machine it up for you. So if you've got any more questions, just put them down in the comments and I'll endeavour to answer them. And as I said, I'll put screenshots at the end of this, so you can actually go in and just download a screenshot and print it. Easy enough to get the dimensions of these. And if you got this far, I'm assuming that you're quite keen on getting yourself a Berdan decapping tool. So good luck with your project.
These dimensions will suit any case that will fit in the tool up to 53 millimeters long. If you have a longer case such as a 8mm Mauser or 3006, just add 10 millimeters to the total length of the tool itself, and that should then work. This tool will fit any rim cases with a rim diameter up to 13.5 millimeters. The 7.62 by 54 Russian is actually 14.5, so you'd have to make a bigger hole for that cartridge.
If you like this sort of thing, please like and subscribe, and until next time, thanks for watching.